Hello everyone, welcome to this session on migration with Azure. Today in this session, we will be discussing this topic that is migration, which is the most asked concept in any Azure interview that you're gonna sit for. So let's go ahead and see what all we'll be covering in this session. But before we move on guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the IntelliPath channel and click on that bell icon to never miss out on any updates from us. Now let's see what all we are gonna cover in this session. So guys, migration basically will be accomplished using the Azure Site Recovery service that we have in the Azure Cloud Platform. We are going to migrate a VM. So guys, this is what we're going to cover in this session. I hope it's clear to you. Now let's move on and start off with this topic, which is Azure migration.
Okay, guys, so beginning with what Microsoft Azure offers you for migration, we will now talk about what Azure Migrate is and what it actually does. So basically just provides us with an overall system or a centralized hub to provide you with all the systems and softwares that are necessary for you to migrate your on-premises servers, databases, or any sort of a software to the Azure platform. Now, this may be any of the servers that you're using, for example, your VMs or your Hyper VMs, or even your databases that you might have on your on-premise system and you want to transfer it to the Azure cloud. So to summarize, we can say that it is a service which is offered to provide a centralized hub to assess and migrate the on-premise servers, infrastructure, applications, and the data to Azure cloud. So it is your one-step solution for you to not only just assess the infrastructure that you want to send to the Azure cloud, but also do the final migration part of it as well. So talking about Microsoft, what Microsoft Azure offers for its migration services, let us first try to understand why we actually need it in the first place. So as I mentioned, it provides you with a centralized hub to do all the migrations from one place itself. So you can assess and also migrate all the servers and infrastructure you need using that one particular service which is offered by Microsoft Azure. So we can basically say that it is a single platform to monitor and run your migrations to the Azure cloud, which is why the need for the service came arised in the first place. Further, we have a range of tools which are there in your Azure Migrate service, which is offered by Azure. Now, these tools are a variety of tools that you might want to integrate with your Microsoft Azure Migrate, or even use these tools to assess and migrate your infrastructure. So all these tools are something which can be linked with Azure Migrate, and it can also be used to integrate with your Azure Migrate to smooth or ease up the process of the entire migration. Finally, we have the assessment and migration. That is what the functionality of it actually is. Using this particular hub, you can assess and migrate the servers, databases, web application, virtual desktops, and any of the data that you want to the Azure cloud, which is why we are using Azure Migrate in the first place. Okay, so let us talk about what are a few of the integrated tools that we have when we are working with Azure Migrate. And these are a variety of tools that we talk about here, which take care of both the aspects of our migration, that is the assessment part of it and the migration part of it as well. So first, it has the server assessment, which is a very basic tool for you to have a small assessment done for your VMware, Hyper VMs, or the physical servers before you actually move on to the migration process. Then we have the server migration, where we talk about the actual migration of the VMwares, Hyper VMs, or the physical servers. Further, we have the database migration assistant, which basically helps you point out the issues that are might be blocking your migration, such that once you know the issues, you can solve it first before you actually go on and migrate your infrastructure. Finally, we have the database migration service, which is primarily just used to migrate your on-premises databases to the Azure cloud. This may include running SQL, Azure SQL database, or the Azure SQL managed instances. It can basically be migrated to any of these services which are present on that Azure Microsoft. So moving on, we have an integrated tool which is also known as Mover, and this is the main functionality of this is to assess the service. This is something which can basically eases up the process of entire assessment, and it is something which has to be downloaded separately and then integrated with Azure Migrate to actually work with. Finally, we have two more services, two more tools that we can integrate with Azure Migrate. One of them being the Web App Migrant Assistant, And as the name suggests, it basically helps us to assess and migrate the on-premises web applications that you have on your system to the Azure cloud and make it a part of app services so that you can work with it along with the different services that are present on Microsoft Azure. Finally, we have the Azure Data Box, which is an import-export service. And using this, you have option of enabling the offline data migration of your infrastructure. So, how this works exactly is that you send a request to Azure to send you uh, data boxes to your location, and they will mail it to you or they will send it to you via courier or some service, and you can basically transfer your entire data or your infrastructure to those data boxes, and they will be sent back to the nearest data store that we have of Azure, Microsoft Azure. And that is how your entire migration will take place to the Azure cloud from your on-premises infrastructure to the Azure cloud. So that is a quick view of all the integrated tools that we have inside Azure Migrate. Moving on, we further talk about the two major things that became a part of Azure Migrate. One of them was assessment, and the other was migration itself. So, talking about assessment, what exactly assessment does? So, as the name suggests, it is sort of a quick test for your on-premises infrastructure or basically the infrastructure that you have to migrate to the Azure cloud. And it these tests can be seen as a number of evaluation techniques which will be used to see how much that entire what the feasibility of the entire infrastructure that you're planning to migrate will be. So one of the first things that the assessment tool does is that it assesses whether the on-premise machines are ready for migration or not. So this is a service which is very important because you have to assess beforehand if you will be actually be able to migrate that particular infrastructure to the Azure cloud. So assessment tool checks for that. Secondly, the sizing of the VMs, which basically means that it evaluates the size of the Azure VMs that you have to migrate, and it gives you the estimated amount of that particular size which will be required to fill up your Azure cloud as well. Further, we have the cost estimation when we are doing the assessment, which basically tells us what the estimated cost will be for the entire migration to take place. And it is basically based on the size of the VMs that you are planning to migrate or the infrastructure that you are planning to migrate, and also a number of other things, for example, the kind of tools you're using and what platform you're using to actually migrate it. Finally, we have the dependency analysis. Now, this is majorly used to effectively identify the cross-server dependencies and optimize strategies for moving the interdependent servers to Azure. In layman terms, we can basically say that it gives you one of the most optimized ways or the optimized services that will be most efficient for you to actually do the migration of that particular VM that you're trying to migrate. So that is a quick view of what exactly the assessment tool does. We will move on to how it actually works in a later part of the module. Finally, we also deal with the migration tool, which basically helps us to migrate the on-premises VMware VMs, Hyper VMs, or the physical servers, even the virtualized machines and the public cloud. And this particular part of the migration can only take place was after we have assessed those machines. So, which is why the assessment tools is very important for us. Now, for the agentless migration of these VMware, the server migration uses the Azure Migrate appliance that you deploy on premises, which basically means that this is a service which you will have to set up on your on-premise server or the server that you are planning to migrate. So even if it's a virtualized server, you will have to set this tool up on that particular server beforehand. The appliance is also used if you set up a server assessment, and which has already been discussed by us previously how the assessment tool actually works. So that is a quick view of what Azure Migrate is and how it will help us to actually do the migration part of the infrastructure that we want to take to the Azure cloud. Moving on, we will now see what a server assessment tool does in detail and study about what it exactly is. Alright, guys, so moving on to begin with what server assessment is. As we discussed, it is a tool which is present there in Azure Migrate itself to measure the readiness and also estimate the effects of migrating the servers that you are trying to migrate to the Azure cloud. So this particular tools helps us to gather all the information that we needed as it was required to further carry on the process of migration and see how it works out. You can eventually only carry out the migration once you have your servers assessment done. And this is why it becomes a very important tool, which is to give you a synopsis or a basic idea of what it will be like once your server has been migrated, what will be the estimated cost, and how much space it will be taking up in your Azure cloud. So majorly we can divide the types of assessment into two parts. One is the performance based and the other is the as is on premises. So the only difference between the two is that the performance based is actually made on the recommendations based on the collected performance data of that particular server or a virtual machine. However, as an on-premises does not use the already existing performance data to make the recommendation. So now that we know what assessment tool is, let's move on to how we can actually run an assessment tool on our particular machine. So there are majorly two ways how this can be done. One is by using the server metadata, which is collected by an appliance, which is set up on your particular machine. Now, this particular tool will gather all the required data which are required to actually create the assessment for it. The second option is to assess the machines by using the server metadata that's imported in the form of a CSV file. So the major part over here that you have to focus is the collection of the server metadata. Now this can be done by the tool itself when it is present on your on-premises machines, or it can be imported by using the CSV format file to actually send the data which is required to finally assess the machine by the tool. So these are majorly the two types of ways how you can run an assessment tools. So now that we know how to run a tool, we should also know what are the basic information that is actually being collected by an assessment tool. And it is majorly these points that we will talk about now. That is the information that we collect from the analysis that is done on an assessment machine. So basically, we begin with the target location, which is the primary service endpoint. That we know how we can actually deploy an assessment tool on our virtual machines or on our servers, let's take a look as to what the analysis for an assessment actually gives us, like what all is the information it is providing for us. So begin with, it gives us the name of the target location, which is basically the location we are migrating to. And this is necessary to know where our final endpoint will be. Finally, we have the target storage disk, which provides us with a name for the type of disk which will be used for storage in Azure. The target disk can be basically be automatic, single managed, standard HDD, or the standard HDD managed, and this is something which is chosen by you initially, or it can be a replica of what you are actually just migrating to the next. Then we have the sizing criteria, which is basically used to right size the Azure VM. Now, this sizing criteria provides you with the size that it will ultimately be using in your Azure cloud. The performance history, here we talk about the performance and till what duration the evaluation of the performance of the server that we are trying to migrate has been done. Finally, we have the VM series, that is the series that you actually want to consider for resizing. So Azure provides you with a number of VM series, and you can basically choose what type of a series you want to migrate your existing virtual machine to. So moving on now with former hands-on to actually deploy a assessment tool and be able to get the assessment for our virtualized machine and see what sort of an analysis it gives us. So this is the first hands-on for our Azure Migrate presentation, and in this particular hands-on, we will be dealing with the server assessment part of our migration process. So to begin with it, I would like to clear a few things. One of which is that in this particular module, we are doing the assessment for physical servers. Now, you can also do this for your on-premise servers, but it requires you to have a VPN access. So to do that, you also have to make sure of another thing, That is the fact that you are, whenever you're doing this assessment, your appliance machine, that is the machine that will actually be carrying out the assessment, and also the virtual machine on which you are carrying out the assessment should both be in the same virtual network. So similarly, what I will be doing now is I will be working with two of the virtual machines that are already on my virtual network on the Azure portal, and I will be doing this particular server assessment on those machines. So going to the Azure portal, I have actually already created two virtual machines over here, and one of them which I will be using as a appliance machine where I will be carrying on the demonstration, the steps that are required to assess it. And in this VM2 dev is the machine that I actually want to assess before I start the migration with it. Alright, so I will just get started with it now. Now, just to clarify this, both of them are in the same virtual network, and also that VM1 appliance is actually has a few configurations, such as the fact that it is a Windows Server 2016 data center machine, and both of them are in the same region. Obviously, they're in the East US region. So let us get started. I will go ahead and search for Azure Migrate over here, and it takes me to this particular page. Right now we are dealing with the assessment and the migration of servers. So I will go on to servers, and the tools are already formed over here. So let us just create new tools over here. Alright, so we will start by clicking on add tool. Over here we are creating a new migration tool for us. So I will select my resource group I have my machines in, and I will enter a migrate project name, for example, dev migrate, so as to migrate all of my development projects, and the geography India. Next, I will move on to select a assessment tool for me, and over here I will select the most basic assessment tool, which is what is your server assessment, and I'll click on next. Similarly for migration, I will select another tool and I'll click on next. So quickly this will review and it will ask me to add more. Alright, so once my tools have been added and my project has been deployed, the first thing I'll do is take a look at the assessment tools which have been added over here. And there's only one assessment tool as of now, which is the Windows Azure Migrate Server Assessment. And I'll just go ahead and click on Discover. So it asks a few questions over here. For example, are your machines virtualized? And in this case, I will be choosing the non-virtualized ones. Now, if you're using machines that are integrated with your VMware vSphere or Hyper-V, you can go with those. But right now, since my machines are physical servers on premises, I will be choosing non-virtualized or other over here. So now it asks me to download a zip file over here, which is the first step. And this actually has to be downloaded on the appliance. So I will be downloading this particular a zip file right now, but also I will be transferring it to the appliance where I actually want to set up my appliance on, and that will be the first virtual machine that we created over here. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go on to connect to my virtual machine. So VM1 is the virtual machine that I want to connect to, and I'll just click on connect, and I will download an RDP for it. So while I'm RDP, it will ask me further details which I entered while I was creating that virtual machine. So I am entering those details over here and I'll click on continue. So once I've connected to these machines, I will transfer the file that I've downloaded over here to that particular machine. So let me do that. Okay, so once I've connected to my machine, I'm using Skype to transfer that file to this machine. And once I've downloaded that particular file, I will be able to run it. So I'll just wait to transfer that file in this particular appliance that I'm using. Okay, so now that I have transferred that particular file, I have unzipped it and these are all the contents of that file. So I will go to Azure Migrate Installer. I'll right click and I will be opening this with PowerShell. So let's see. Uh, so let me just go to downloads and see if it has been, so it's still compressed. What I'll do is I'll quickly unzip this particular file. Alright, so I have the extracted file over here. So again, I'll go to Azure Migrate Installer. I'll right click and I'll click on Run with PowerShell. So it will automatically launch PowerShell for me, and it will run the script that is required on this particular PowerShell. So once my this particular appliance has been installed onto my machine, it will launch a web application for me where I have to enter a few details for the virtual machine that I'm trying to access for. So I'll just wait for this to convert into a web application now. Alright, so now we will wait for this particular appliance to start running, and we will be putting in the information that is required over here. Now, also there is one more point that you have to make sure when you're setting up your virtual machine is that you're enabling HTTP/AT on it so that you are connected to the internet whenever required, or you can just add that on later as well. So let's get started with it. We have to begin with setting up the prerequisites. So I'll be accepting the license terms over here. Second, it will check the connectivity to the internet on its own. So once that is done, there will be a few more checks that will have to be updated. And once, if these updates are not available, it will be installing them for you over here. So we can just wait till that finishes on its own, and then we'll click on continue over here. So it will ask me to give them the administrator right. So for that, I'll enter the username and password for this particular machine once again. So now it will install all the latest updates that are currently missing from our machine right now. All right, so let's see if our first step has been. Okay, so it will have to be restarted. So we'll just click over here to restart the entire application. And this makes sure that whatever you have already done is okay. So I'll just go ahead and select this once again. Okay, so now that these are installed, we will click on continue to go to the second step. Now the second step is to log into our Azure portal from this particular appliance. So I'll quickly do that as well. Alright, so I've signed into my particular portal, and I will just go ahead. So once you sign it, it will ask for your subscription and the name of the Migrate project. So I'll go ahead and select my subscription as pay as you go. And the Migrate project I'm dealing with is Dev Migrate. Now the appliance name can be anything. I'll just enter the name of the this particular VM that we are chosen as the appliance. So right, so I'll just go ahead and click on register now. Alright, so once our portal is successfully registered, I'll just click on continue over here. And now the details I will be providing will be of the physical server that I have to actually access over here. So let's see. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is we have to add credentials for it. So now the operating system that we're dealing with is a Windows machine. So I'll let this remain as Windows. Now I have to provide a friendly name for the credentials that can be anything. I'll just go with cred1. Now the username actually has to be the one we had entered for that particular machine. So I'll enter the username and password for that. Alright, once that is done, I'll just quickly go and add that. Alright, so the second thing it provides is some more information, which is basically the IP address. So I'll quickly go back to my Azure portal, and I'll go to virtual machines, and I'll go to the machine that I actually want to deal with, and I'll quickly copy this particular public IP address. Okay, so now when I go ahead and I add this information, I will be entering the public IP address for it, separated by a comma, and the credentials we mentioned for this particular machine. Right, so I'll just go ahead and validate it. Alright, so in this particular scenario, you can enter the IP address or you can also enter the name of that particular machine. So over here, I'll enter the name as VM2dev under the credentials one that we had entered before. Alright, so once that has been validated, we can go ahead and save and start discovery. So it usually takes 2 minutes to let the entire discovery to take place. So we'll wait till that happens. And guys, so once our initiated discovery has been completed, we will go back to the portal. And in this particular sense, I'll go back to my own machine instead of the virtual machine. So I will quickly go back to the Azure Migrate service that I have over here. And I'll go back to servers. Now, currently it says that the discovery is in progress, so we will wait till the number of discovers turns to one. And I don't think it should be taking that much amount of time, but we'll give it another 2-3 minutes to actually complete the process. Alright, so now that the count of discovered servers has turned to one, I will be going ahead and clicking on access to actually create a assessment documentation. And for the assessment type, I will select the fact that it's an Azure VM. The delivery source will be a machine discovered from the Azure Migrate appliance, and the name of the assessment will be assessment dev. Alright, so I'll click on next, and over here I'll create a new group, and the name of the group will be dev, and so it will be dev1, and I will select the VM that has been discovered, and I'll click on next. So once it is done, I'll just go ahead and create the assessment over here. So once my assessment has been created, I'll quickly refresh the page so that I have a single group that has been added over here. And once we have done that, I will quickly go to assessments and check if our assessment has been added over here as well. Okay, so we have a group and also we have an assessment. So I'll quickly go to the assessments. And over here, you can see one of the assessments that has been created. So when you click on it, you will actually be able to view your assessment information on the documents that are required for you over here itself. You can also go to readiness and the course details to get more information, and also you can edit these particular properties to exactly what you want them to be. So this is basically how we do an Azure assessment for migration. In the next hands-on, we will be talking about how we can do the migration and how it actually works. Okay, guys, moving on to our final step, which was the migration tools that we have in our Azure Migrate service that we're going to use. The main purpose of this migration tool is to carry out the final migration from the source VM location to the target VM location. Now, these types of migrations are divided into three types based on where your virtual machines actually are. So, what the source location of these virtual machines actually is. So the first one is the on-premises VMware VMs, where your VMs are in your VMware, and these migrate VMs to the Azure cloud using the agents as all the agent-based migration. And this particular specification in your migration tool will basically help you to transfer the VMs that are present in your VMware to eventually to the Azure cloud. Secondly, we have the on-premises Hyper-V VMs, which are basically the VMs that are deployed on Hyper-V. And this particular type of migration will help us transfer those to the Azure cloud itself. Finally, we have the on-premises physical servers, where we have the machines as a physical server on our on-premise environment. And it is basic. This particular option is basically used to migrate those physical machines to the Azure cloud. Now, these may be virtualized machines, VMs from the other clouds, for example, from AWS. And by treating them as virtual machines, we can actually transfer them to the Azure cloud. So we are basically treating them as a virtualized system, and we transfer them or migrate it to the Azure cloud using this particular option. So that is a quick overview of how the migration tool actually works. To understand it even better, we will now perform a hands-on on the server migration and how we use the migration tool to finally transfer the virtualized VMs to our Azure cloud. In this particular hands-on, we will be performing server migration. And for this particular hands-on, we are dealing with a physical server, which is present on our Azure Portal virtual machine. Now, in the previous hands-on, you had already noticed how we had created two virtual machines. One was the appliance machine, and the other was the machine that we actually had to migrate. And using the assessment tools, we basically assess the readiness and all the other properties that are required for that particular machine. So now what we will be doing is we will actually be migrating that machine to another virtual network to another subscription on our Azure portal itself. So let us go back to the Azure portal, and over here we have the tools that we had created earlier. So what we will do is we will click on discover over here under that particular tool. Now when it asks if the machines are virtualized, we will be clicking on not virtualized or other, and our target region is East US. So now that we can confirm, we have already confirmed, we can just go ahead with creating the resources over here itself. So let us wait for the deployment to get submitted and the resources to actually get deployed. Alright, so once the deployment has taken place, we will select the appliance type over here, and the appliance that we are going to set up or scale out existing setup is a replication appliance, so we'll just click on that. So now it presents us with a number of steps over here. So let us take a look as to what we have to do in them. Alright, so the first step is to download and install the replication appliance software. So what we have to do is we have to create a Windows Server 2016 machine, which we have already done. And the second step is to download this particular file and actually take it over there. So also we have to configure the replication appliance and register it to the migrate project. So we have two files over here. One is this particular file, which is the application software installer, and second is this particular file, which actually contains the registration key file to register the appliance. So we'll just go ahead and download these two files, and I'll quickly transfer it to my virtual machine, which I have created for my appliance machine. Alright, so I'll wait for these two downloads to take place and for me to transfer these particular files to the environment where I'm creating my appliance machine. Alright, so once you have transferred all the files to the machine where you actually want to set up your appliance, so we will go to what we want to actually do over here, which is this particular installer package, which will basically discover the servers that are around us. So we will be clicking on that. Okay, guys. So once I have downloaded this particular file, I will run it so as to execute it on the virtual machine. So let us wait for the files to get extracted and finally the application to run on this particular machine. So instead of transferring the files, I logged into the portal from this machine itself and I downloaded that particular file, the replication appliance software installer, directly onto the virtual machine. Alright guys, so once you have run that particular file, it will ask you for a few details that are required. So first it asks you if you want to install the configuration server and process server over here, or you have to add additional process servers to scale out the deployment. So I will, since I'm setting up the site recovery for the first time, I will install the configuration server and the other server as well. So once I accept the third party license, it asks for the registration key. Now, this is the key that we had transferred earlier, so I'll just select that and click on next. Now, I will directly connect to the Azure Site Recovery. Alright, so now it will be checking up some prerequisites for us. Alright guys, so once all of your prerequisites have been passed, we will click on next. So now we have to provide a root password and database password for your MySQL account, and You can provide any password over here. Alright, so once this is done, I'll click on next. Alright, so it asks if you want to protect your VMware virtual machines for any additional components, and if you want to protect them, I don't really have any of the VMware virtual machines over here, so this works. Then again, we will be having an install location. So I have selected a C drive for me. Alright, I think we can browse for more since this one is a little. I think I'll just stick to this one for now. Alright, so I will be selecting my network interface, which is the Ethernet, and also the one for the Azure components in case of failback. Next, it gives me a summary of everything that I have chosen up till now. So now it will be installing the entire process for me. So I'll have to wait until this finish. It takes around 4 to 5 minutes to finish this entire installation progress. Alright, so once we are done with all the installations over here, we'll go ahead and press on the finish button. It asks us to copy this particular passphrase, which will be used later on. So I will click on yes, and also I will save it in a notepad over here itself. Alright, we'll go back to the application, and over here it will ask us to add an account. Now, these account details are of the virtual machine that you have to migrate. So the name of that particular machine is VM migrate, and I will enter the username and the password for the administration. This is the same username and password that we used earlier when we were creating the machine. Alright, so once we are done with this, we'll click on OK. Now we have saved this particular account. So we'll quickly go ahead and click on Vault Registration. Over here, we'll browse to the same file that we used earlier as our Vault credentials. So let me go back and I'll select the same file over here and I'll click on Register. Now this will take a few minutes to register the Azure Site Recovery to our entire module or this particular virtual machine as a server. So we'll have to wait around 5 to 10 minutes for this to take place. So once it says that the DRA registration has succeeded, we can click on OK and close this particular installation. Now we'll go back to our Azure Migrate project, and over here we will refresh this so that the tools are up to date. Alright, so once our tools have been refreshed, we can again click on the Discover, and you will see we have an option to select the configuration server over here. So it will basically be a drop-down box like this, and you have to select the name of the VM that we have just installed our appliance installation in it. So I'll just go ahead and click on appliance and finalize the registration now. Alright, so once our registration has been finalized, we can close this. Now, again, we will refresh the tool so that we can see that the tools are up to date and if they have started discovering yet or not. Alright, so as you can see, the discovery is in progress, and once the discovered servers gets activated or it increases its count, we can start with the replication process. Now, there is another way we can speed up this particular process, and for that, we will go back to our home and we will go to the source code where our site recovery has been um, created or deployed. So behind migration, the service which is working over here is the Azure Site Migration, which is what is actually being used for replication of the devices. And finally, the migration part is something which is done by the Azure Migrate. So to help discover the machine, we can go to the recovery service vault, which is here in the same resource group. And in here, I can scroll down to replicated items and go ahead on clicking on adding a replicate over here to start with the replication. So the source in this particular scenario is Azure. I'm sorry, it's on premises, and I'll click on yes. I will also check mark the fact that we know that Azure Migrate exists. So I'll go to the source location, which is the appliance virtual machine, and the machine type will be a physical machine. And as you can see, it has an inbuilt process server over here, which is already been selected. So I'll go ahead and click on OK. Now for the target type, I will let these be as they are, and I'll select the virtual network as the one we had created. Alright, so I'll select the same virtual network over here. Alright, now I have to select the name of the physical machine over here. Now I don't remember the exact name of the machine, but it was Azure Migrate. So let us just take a look at it. So I go to the virtual machines, and over here we have the virtual machine, which is VM Migrate. I'll quickly go to VM Migrate and also copy the public IP address over here. Alright, so I'll go ahead and I add a physical machine. I'll add the name of the machine, which is VM Migrate, and I'll enter the IP address, and I'll select the OS type as Windows, and I'll go ahead and click on OK. So it will basically start discovering the physical machine, something which will also get updated on the Azure Migrate resource that we are running. Alright, so once our machine is visible over here, we will select it, and I'll just click on OK now. Now we have to configure the properties over here, for which I'll select the this type as standard HDD. I'll select the default storage account which is there, and the VM migrate user account for us to install the mobility. Next, I'll go ahead to the target installations or the target properties that needs to be set up. So in our next step, we have to configure the replication settings, for which we need a replication policy over here. But as you can see, we do not have any replications policy as of now, so this is something we have to create. Now to create this, I'll have to go back to my Azure RSV, and from another tab, and over here I will scroll down to something which is known as the site recovery infrastructure under management. Here I will go under for VMware and physical servers and click on replication policies. Alright, so there is already an existing policy, but it is in use, so I'll create a new replication policy over here. Now the name of this policy is policy 1, for example, and it will basically be for VMware or physical machines which we are currently using. Now we will select the target type over here, the RPO threshold, which is basically the alerts will be generated when the continuous data protection replication exceeds the specified threshold value over here. Now once this is done, we'll just go ahead and click on OK, and it is actually being created right now. So once this is created, we will go back to our how we were creating our replication. Alright, so since this deployment is complete, I can go back to my replication settings, and we'll quickly refresh it so that so it should be visible over here in some time because we have just created it So I think it's taking some time to. All right, another thing that we have to do over here is we have to go to the policy, and we will be associating it with the configuration server, which is appliance itself. So I think it should be visible after we have associated this particular policy. All right, it is associated from here. Let us go back to the replication policy and let's see if it has been updated. Right, so we have the policy over here, policy 1, we selected that. And this can stay to no since we are keeping the default settings as it is. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and click on OK and enable replication right now. Now we'll have to wait for around 5 to 10 minutes to complete the operation over here. Okay guys, so now the same step can be done using our Azure Migrate resource itself. So I'll just refresh this so that each of the resources are available over here. And once I see that I have a resource, I have a virtual machine under my discovered servers, my next step is to start replicating those. To do that, I will simply click on replicate over here. And it takes me to a wizard where the first question is if the machines are virtualized, and I'll click on non-virtualized or other. And I'll select the name of my on-premise appliance, which is appliance itself. So next I'll go to the virtual machines and I'll specify the migration settings manually, and I'll choose the virtual machine that I have to migrate. Now next, the target settings are basically the resource group and the virtual network to which your machine will be migrated to. So I have migrate target a resource group over here, and I'll simply select that. Next, I'll go to compute, and I will keep these as default such that it automatically selects the matching configuration. Uh, for disk type, I will select the disk type to be premium. Next, I'll start the review, and basically I'll start with the replication over here. So this will again take around 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and once this is completed, we'll come back to it. Okay, so now once the replication task has been completed, we can click on overview over here to get a summary of what we have done till now. And this will basically take you to the next two steps, which are the final migration process. So once you click on migrate over here, you will be able to finally start your migration process. And that is something which is also going to be visible in your overview section. So once I click on it, let us take a look as to how it will exactly be seen in your target resource group. So in this particular case, all you have to do is in the first step, go to test migration and finally test migrate on this particular machine. That is, you select the machine and then you click on migrate from over here. So once I migrate this, it will be transferred to my final resource group, which will be the target resource group that I selected. And that is how the migration will take place. And that is it for this particular hands-on.